Hey guys, welcome to another episode of Kridious Cafe on yet another beautiful Sunday. And the topic for the day is 5 reasons why science fiction is obsessed with cockroaches. So here we go. Cockroaches can survive radiation, poison, starvation, infrastructure collapse into oblivion, and even the random political experiments that humanity keeps throwing at it every few decades. Which raises a very unique and rather intriguing question that why is science and science fiction so obsessed with them? Why do dystopian movies, post-apocalyptic novels, cyberpunk stories, and these philosophical sci-fi keep bringing back this tiny six-legged free-loading menace like it has some kind of franchise rights? Because the cockroach in science fiction is merely just a cockroach. It is usually survival, adaptation, hidden systems, political exhaustion, and humanity's deepest existential insecurities. Wearing an armor and refusing any or all eviction notices. And you know what's the most uncomfortable part? Science fiction might be understanding humanity better than humanity understands itself. So here we go with the reason number 1. Cockroaches represent survival. Do you all remember that wonderful science fiction flick called as Wall-E? The Earth is dead, humanity has abandoned the planet, and the whole world has become kind of a landfill sponsored by consumerism and bad urban planning. And yet, there's still that one little six-legged cockroach that is walking across that terrain of that landfill, as if humanity has finally lowered the rent. That scene is funny, but deeply symbolic. Science fiction time and again uses cockroaches just to remind us that evolution might prefer resilience over intelligence. Cockroaches, or be their ancient relatives, have existed for hundreds and millions of years on Earth. Older than dinosaurs, older than any empire, the greatest of empires that ever existed, older than any ideology that always claimed to be permanent. Humans write philosophy, build governments, invent economics, but then emotionally collapse because one app moved one button slightly towards the left. Cockroaches write nothing, campaign for nothing, promise nothing, and yet would definitely survive the next apocalypse whenever it comes to us. I find it rather disrespectful, don't you? That is why post-apocalyptic fiction keeps returning to cockroaches, just to remind us that life will not require civilization's permission to continue. And maybe that is why the cockroach symbolism suddenly feels strangely relatable online. In many parts of the world, people increasingly feel less like fearsome and majestic lions, shaping history, and more like exhausted organisms, simply trying to survive systems designed by people with better air conditioning. Purely fictional observation, of course. We have number 2. Cockroaches represent adaptation. Do you remember the cities in Blade Runner 2049 or those in Cyberpunk 2077? Overpopulated, neon everywhere, billboards larger than governments, corporations behaving like nations while nations behaving like buffering screens. The cities, they actually felt like insect colonies, and that is more intentional than you give credit for. Cyberpunk fiction constantly uses insects, especially cockroaches, to demonstrate adaptation within an unstable system. Humans survive through institutions, identities, ideologies, and stability. Cockroaches survive through flexibility. They simply adjust, which honestly sounds more like the modern internet culture. One week, everyone becomes a philosopher, the next an economist, and maybe a third week, they'll all be a geopolitical strategist just because they saw 3 podcasts and reel with some vivid subtitles. The digital populations actually mutate faster than certain cockroaches. Science fiction actually learned this quite early. In unstable systems, adaptability is power. Not wisdom, not even morality, but adaptability. Cockroaches do not hold press conferences. They do not publish manifestos. Just one day they simply gather and become impossible to ignore, which scientifically speaking is almost all of internet movement of today. Coming to number 3. Cockroaches represent hidden systems. Do you remember Edgar the Bug from one of my favorite science fiction movies from Hollywood, Men in Black? A giant cockroach alien wearing a human skin suit and quietly operating inside institutions. First of all, horrifying and evil. Secondly, deeply symbolic. Because cockroaches in science fiction often represent systems operating beneath visibility. Inside walls, inside infrastructure, inside bureaucracies nobody fully understands. That is why dystopian sci-fi constantly shows underground tunnels, leaking machinery, hidden laboratories, giant server rooms beneath cities. The cockroach becomes symbolic of structures humans stop noticing because they become normal. Today, invisible systems quietly shape outrage, attention, ideology, trends, and even emotional reactions. Entire societies end up emotionally reacting to systems that they don't actually see in life. Which honestly sounds futuristic until you realize most people nowadays form political opinions from short videos, edited with dramatic music and aggressive subtitles. Science fiction understands something politics often forgets. People can tolerate almost anything until the walls start moving. And perhaps the scariest systems are not the ones that are openly controlling society. They are the ones that society learns to live with inconspicuously. Number 4. Cockroaches represent humanity's fear of decay. Do you remember the premise of Metamorphosis? Gregor Samsa wakes up transformed into a giant, insect-like creature. And the horrifying part is not the visuals of the transformation itself, but how society quickly stops treating him like a normal human being. This is actually one of the most important reasons that cockroaches find their place in dystopian fiction. They symbolize neglect, disposability, invisibility, and becoming socially inconvenient. Kafka understood something terrifyingly modern. Systems often stop recognizing humanity the moment usefulness disappears. Modern societies increasingly reduce people into productivity scores, engagement metrics, demographics, statistics, and content categories. At some point, civilization quietly stops asking, "Who are you?" and starts asking, "What function do you perform?" That is pure dystopian science fiction, isn't it? And also half the modern internet. Today, Kafka would probably not write Metamorphosis. He would rather write about a man becoming a customer support ticket number. It's the same horror genre, just slightly better Wi-Fi. Even cyberpunk cities feel emotionally insect-like. Millions of people living together, yet increasingly disconnected, anonymous, and replaceable. Science fiction uses cockroaches because they embody the fear that highly advanced societies may still reduce humans into disposable organisms. Very futuristic, very efficient, very concerning. Coming to the last reason for the day, reason number 5. Cockroaches represent the possibility that humanity is not so special. Not as much as we think, at least. You notice a strange pattern or trend with post-apocalyptic or dystopian science fiction. Whether it is Wall-E, Starship Troopers, cyberpunk dystopias, nuclear wasteland fiction, or cosmic horror stories, humanity collapses dramatically. Governments disappear, megacities decay, civilizations destroy themselves while giving emotional speeches about glory, hope, and destiny. Yet somehow, the cockroaches remain. Science fiction repeatedly returns to this image because cockroaches challenge humanity's favorite assumption that intelligence is evolution's final masterpiece. Humans assume consciousness, philosophy, technology, and civilization make us exceptional. Cockroaches require none of these things. No economy, no ideology, no nationalism, no late-night debates featuring 7 angry people and 1 exhausted moderator, or rather screaming moderator. They simply survive, and that deeply unsettles us. Because science fiction quietly asks a terrifying question. What if evolution rewards resilience more than intelligence, more than even brilliance? That question sits underneath countless dystopian stories. In many post-human futures, humanity vanishes, systems fail, history collapses, but life continues. Not glorious life, not enlightened life, just adaptable life. And maybe that is why people online no longer romanticize perfection. Increasingly, they romanticize resilience. The organism that survives the chaos starts looking more relatable than the hero giving speeches during it. Because globally, more and more people feel exhausted by systems too large to emotionally process, and when systems become incomprehensible and overwhelming, survival itself begins to be revolutionary. Again, purely a fictional observation. So those were the 5 facts. Science fiction does not obsess over cockroaches because they're disgusting. It obsesses over them because they are resilient. They represent a deeply uncomfortable possibility that evolution may ultimately reward adaptability more than greatness. And perhaps that is why dystopian fiction keeps returning to them. Because when humanity imagines the end of civilization, the creature we secretly expect to inherit the earth is never the philosopher, never the king or the revolutionary. It is a thing that is quietly surviving behind the walls, while history is busy arguing with itself. This is Kridious Cafe, where fiction doesn't just imagine the future, it reveals what humanity fears about itself. I'll see you in the next one. Kridious checks.
My love's erased. This is